Hi, guys.
Hello.
It's a huge honor for me talking to you guys. So I think everybody will hear us will be very glad to know more about PECs and you guys. And I want to start with you guys introducing yourselves.
I'm Lori Frost. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I've been working with kids with autism for almost 40 years and been working with Dr. Andy Bondi for about that long too.
I'm Andy Bondi. I'm a behavior analyst and clinical psychologist. Lori and I have been working together a long time. We developed the PECS protocol together over many years, working together in the little state of Delaware. And over the last 30 plus years, we've been trying to teach everyone around the world how to engage in functional communication and how to create effective educational environments.
Do you guys have any personal connection with any autistic person?
Not in terms of family. My personal history, I started working with kids on the spectrum when I was in undergraduate school. I didn't know much about it, but I started working in programs and after school programs. And this was back in, 1970. And
Long time.
a long time. So, working with children with different types of challenges was always interesting to me, trying to understand why is that happening and what can I do to help. And it just started to grow.
I also started working with children with autism as an undergraduate, and the first student I met was my realization this is what I want to do for the rest of my professional career.
Good to know that. How this idea of creating PECs came up. And I'm very curious to know and how you guys thought about this kind of communication system.
Well, my background as a speech language pathologist, I did not have a lot of clinical experience with kids who don't talk. So when I started working in this school program with Dr. Bondi, my caseload or the number of students I was seeing every week was relatively skewed towards kids on the autism spectrum who didn't talk. And my first struggle was I'm a speech pathologist. I'm supposed to help children improve their speech. I'm also a speech language pathologist, so that means I'm supposed to be improving their language, but I don't know how to make them talk. So working with Andy and other professionals in the program, I started learning, well, there's a long history of what we do with these children. And the first one was, let's see if we can at least teach them to imitate things I say or sounds I make. And sitting with one of my students who was 3 years old saying, say ma or say ba, he had absolutely no interest in doing that. And I tried using things like, well, good job if you tried. That wasn't of interest to him either. And after several days of failing to get him to imitate any sound, I then started going back further in my history. And I had worked with some individuals with who didn't talk, but who had cerebral palsy. And these were individuals who couldn't talk, were not likely to learn to talk. And they also had fine motor issues. So we hadn't been doing sign language with them, but what we had been doing was what I call low-tech communication systems, low-tech picture communication systems. And I had one student who could put his hand on one of 4 pictures, and very, very successfully. And that's what got me to wondering, well, with this student I'm working with now, why don't I try some picture-based communication?
We had conversations though about the difference between, pointing to a picture to sort of say, oh, that's a cup versus asking for the cup because it's got some interesting juice. So at that time, you were working on some requests.
Yes, working on requests from the very beginning, because from the very beginning, we recognized I need to teach them language that's meaningful to them. So when I say touch cup, and he maybe does touch the picture of cup, the only thing left to say is, yeah, good job. But if I taught him to touch the cup because I was holding a cup with a container of juice, then the outcome was much more meaningful from his perspective. My student, though, did not learn how to tap a single picture. And when I had multiple pictures in front of him, even down to 3 or 4 pictures, he would still do this. And I had to then interpret. I don't know if you mean the cup or the apple or the toy car.
Like using a board communication.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was very important from his perspective that I interpret carefully and correctly. So if I thought his hand had touched the cup picture and I'm pouring him juice, sometimes I had some negative reactions, and they were along the lines of, I want the car, and my hand kind of hit both pictures. So I asked Andy to come in and problem solve with me one day. And the first thing Andy pointed out to me was, can you guess with pretty good certainty what he wants right this second? And I said, sure. So I held out the juice and I held out the car, and he reached for the car. So what Andy pointed out to me is, right now we know what the correct picture is. It's the car picture. So how about we just put one picture on the table at a time? And as we were trialing this with this little boy, what we also realized was teaching him to touch or point to a picture isn't teaching him how to interact with us. It was teaching him how to interact with my laminated cardboard picture on the table.
I will add that because we were problem solving, Lori said, watch. So I was sitting behind the student so I could just watch the interaction and not be part of it. I wanted him to focus on her. So in that position, when Lori had a single picture and was holding the item that he clearly wanted, for whatever reason, instead of just pointing because he was kind of looking a lot of different places, I helped him pick up the picture and put it in Lori's hand. And immediately
he got the car.
She got the car. And, you could kind of see this look on his face, like, is that all it's going to take to get a car around here? And I, knew enough about, prompting and helping how to stop very quickly. And really within a couple of minutes, he would just pick up the picture in front of him, give it to Lori, and she would give him a card. He'd be happy. And obviously we were happy.
Sure.
I really think from his perspective, he was thinking, this is easy. Why didn't you try this several months ago? So he was a much happier kid after that. And then I replicated this with several other of they were primarily young children at that time, 3 and 4-year-olds. And then other staff in the program started replicating it. We would all get together going, that was easy. And now, rather than teaching him to interact with a picture on the table, we actually taught him to pick up the picture and interact with somebody by putting the picture into that person's hand. And that's the nature of communication. I do something to somebody else. I don't do something to inanimate objects on the table and hope people might guess what I'm thinking.
We quickly observed that for this initial lesson, having 2 people, one to have the reinforcement of the other to provide the assistance, we got through that initial learning much quicker than if I'm trying to hold the item and help the child give it into my hand and which hand. It's just way more complicated with one person from the child's point of view.
So we separated the role of the person he's going to communicate with from the person who's going to be behind him, helping him to manipulate the picture.
And although we realized it was, if you will, staff intensive, the lesson went very quickly. And we didn't have to continue with 2 people beyond this initial, let's get this, what do I do with this picture, lesson over.
And this little guy loved toy cars, and he was used to having a whole bucket of toy cars to play with. And when I offered him just one and the bucket was on the floor, actually what I did was I emptied out the bucket and gave him the bucket. And when I offered just one, he was really motivated to get it by giving me the picture. And he quickly, I never had to take the car away from him. He dumped it in the bucket and I showed him another one and he reached for the picture and gave it to me again. And pretty soon he had all the cars in the bucket, which is what he liked.
And essentially over months, if not, a year or two, Lori and I and other people started to expand the lessons. It didn't come all at once. It wasn't like we went in a room and said, oh, what should we teach next? It was really more being sensitive to what are the learners doing right now? How do we get a little more from that action? And that became the sequence of training.
Amazing, guys. It was kind of natural born, of this communication system. And I have to tell you, my experience with PAX, because I have a son. He is 15 years old, but I suspect that he has autism when he was almost 2. It was like 33 months. And when he was almost 3, I knew about PAX. Were very new for me, and for me it makes sense because it's a way to you take the communication and become more tangible, more concrete. No, it's not just a technique, but it's how the words comes from our mouth to the ears. No, and you can see this in cards. So, and I started. I bought the book of PAX. It's a big one. No, yes, I remember that. And I started to read, and I think I read 2 or 3 chapters, and I start to do. But I was wrong. It was my mistake. But I didn't read that you have to start with 1 card, and I started with 32 cards. Okay, I was desperate to start this new communication system with my son, and okay, I will start with 32 because 32 is the amount of cards that I can print in 3 sheets. And I introduced the 32 cards to my son. My luck is he always was super visual, so he could recognize the pictures. I started with pictures of things that he actually was using and was eating or watching, and a lot of things. I start with food and cartoons and a lot of things, and I put everything in a box of floppy disk, old floppy disks. Okay, I don't want to say my age, but yes, I used floppy disk, and I started to follow the method. He started to follow the system, and I think in 1 or 2 months, he started to say juice.
Yeah.
In Portuguese, is suco. He said cuco, similar, but I knew what he was meaning. And automatically after that, he stopped using the card of juice and started to say juice.
Yeah.
It was magical for me, and I became a huge fan, and I started to indicate PAX to everybody that couldn't speak, because I think it's something that really makes sense, and for me was kind of magical. Like my son was expelled, and started to talk. Was gradually, was word by word, okay, but was very effective. So I have another story with my mom. She didn't know anything about PAX, anything, and I didn't tell her about PAX. And I was in an appointment, and my mom was with my kid, and he started to climb her and bring her to the fridge because the box of PAX cards was on the fridge.
Oh,
So he took the cards, and all the box was open and all the cards was on the floor. So my mom thought would be a memory game. Okay,
yeah.
she let him play in there, and he was looking for something, and he took the card of the pacifier with the card, and he gave to my mom, and my mom could understand what he wants. So that's why PAX is so natural. And my mom was very happy. It was the first time that my son communicated with her, and she was terrified after that because she was thinking, "Where is that? Where could I find the pacifier in this house?" She didn't know where, but was like a funny moment, and a moment remarkable for my mom, because she could talk with my son for the first time. So it was a very good experience for me. So I'm very thankful for you guys thinking about this kind of communication.
That's a fantastic story.
What do you think? What changed with PAX last 10 years? Because it's a old project, you know. You have like a adult project already. Last 10 years with technologies and more internet and more people knowing about PAX. What do you guys would say that is the big difference last 10 years?
I think more people are aware of PECs, and that's good, but also sometimes the problem. Sometimes people think that, well, if there's a picture around, it must be PECs, and they might have a schedule on the wall, and they say, oh, look, that's PECs, and they go, no, that's not PECs. Those are pictures. We also see people, wanting to do PECs, and they'll only use it at snack time or lunchtime. So the only pictures are pictures of food. So it's like a menu at a restaurant. And, that's not good communication either. Technology-wise, the biggest change is everybody now is fascinated by an iPad or a device or a tablet of some sort. So Lori has been trying to guide a lot of people on how to transition from PECs to a device.
But first and foremost, I always talk to people about the research that has demonstrated how many of these young children start to talk. What we know is a lot of them start to talk once they've started putting pictures together into sentences. So what I caution people about is there's a good likelihood for children who are specifically 5 years and younger who make it through what we call phase 4, they're going to be talkers. And they're going to be independent talkers. They're not going to need an iPad, or I still have history of, spending $8,000 on a speech generating device, not personally, but so that's always been my first message.
Our first observation and description of almost 90 young children with autism, showed that it was over 85% of the children were talking within 6 months to a year. And so for those kids, there is no need to transition. It's really when we see a youngster with lots and lots of pictures and even sentence structure, but still not developing speech, that for almost vocabulary size, using a device becomes important. The other part of research is, although everybody loves the devices because they speak, there is actually no evidence that it helps children acquire speech faster, better than using traditional PECs.
I think one of the barriers I've run into is I've yet to meet even a 1.5-year-old child who doesn't already have a history with touch screens, whether it's mom and dad's phone or their tablet. And when we then try to limit their use of those screens to, now I need you to communicate with this screen, that sometimes is a big challenge. So especially for those children who are very young, I do talk to people about, you need to give PECs time to work. And at some point, we might say, he's not going to be a talking child. So we will then start looking at alternatives that are voice output based.
Good to know that. And nowadays, is PEC indicated to any autistic person that doesn't talk?
There are a number of organizations, including the American Pediatric Association, which has recommended that children with autism who have difficulty acquiring speech should have an opportunity to try PECs. However, when we meet a youngster, a year and a half, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, we do not want to wait for the child to fail to speak for 6 months or a year. We see no point. You can't communicate today. I can teach you phase 1 today. I'm going to do it. So if that child's having trouble with maybe no speech, maybe just very little speech or not very functional speech, we'll start PECs. And sometimes within a few weeks, we say, oh, he's talking so much, we don't need to continue. We see for other kids, they speak more when they have their communication book around. So if I take the book away, he's speaking less, not more. So I have to assess it child by child. If I get rigid in my head, everybody, nobody, making hard rules like that, then I'm not being very sensitive to the individual children.
We don't wait for speech to fail, but that doesn't mean we're giving up on speech. I'm a speech pathologist.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
So a big other part of my interactions with the children across the day was working on formation of sounds and strengthening the ability to make sounds. But I separate those lessons from communication lessons because I don't want the children to get frustrated with their textbook if I'm also making them or requiring that they make sounds or try to say something.
So we almost think of it as two tracks. There's one track on functional communication with PECS, and there's another track on vocal sound development. And if they merge, great. And if they don't merge, we still have communication going. So that's, it's never been a one or the other for us. This is where we think people are too rigid. It must be speech or it's only pictures, and that is not the answer.
Yeah, they are a way to the same destiny, no?
Yeah, that's where we're going.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
good. And but you think most of people using PECS nowadays is autistic?
Well,
do you have numbers of this?
The school program we were in was a school for students with autism. But even there, we started to work with students with other language issues, and there's research with teenagers and adults and many, many other disabilities. Some people have even made modifications for those who are visually impaired, where they can touch materials but still engage in that exchange and interaction. So the use of PECS has expanded to many, many other populations.
And how PECS came to Brazil?
Do
you remember?
Soraya, we met first in the United States, and she eventually brought us to Brazil to do what we call our level 1 training. And it was so well received. Soraya started receiving lots of requests for help. So that's what led to us eventually opening an office in Brazil.
But did you guys have before? Soraya asking you, before that, have you had some requesting from Brazil or someone from Brazil asking for or communicating to you or something like that?
Not specifically from Brazil. I mean, our first international training was in England.
Okay.
And then Canada and then France, and it's slowly changed around the world. Now, Pyramid has offices like the one that Soraya has in 16 different countries around the world.
Oh, 16?
Now it's 17.
17 countries, yes. Italy, we just added Italy. So the manual has been translated into
16 languages.
16 languages. So it's actually in both Brazilian Portuguese and Portugal Portuguese. If there's a little difference, they tell me, I don't know, but I believe them. So we have a consultant in Portugal, and she and Soraya have done some training together as well.
Oh, what's the most unexpected country that you are now and you never thought about that?
There's many.
Japan and Korea and Australia and
China.
All over Europe and China and trying to learn about cultures and how families interact, what educational systems are in place, who funds educational systems. That's why we always want somebody who's living in a country to provide the training. For Andy and Lori to go take a trip someplace, that's interesting. But we don't live there. We don't stay there. We don't know the local customs.
Don't speak the language.
We don't speak the language. I'm terrible with language. That's why I use pictures. But find, like Soraya, passionate, hardworking people who want to help kids and families and staff. and offer a wide variety of training and workshops, consultation and materials to help. And then we all work together, all of our consultants, we train together, we stay in touch together, Skype, Zoom. This is the way we can stay in touch with everybody around the world. So we have a nice pyramid family.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I'm thinking how hard it is. It's not just translating words. No, it's about locating, about the culture, a lot of things, no?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, even doing a workshop in some cultures, their culture is the teacher talks and everybody listens. And when we do a workshop, we want to interact. We want to ask questions. We want to hear things. We want to adjust to what's going on. And some audiences, it's talk to me. I really want you to talk to me. Now, in other countries, like non-stop talking. I mean, so now you have to listen a little bit. So it's a nice little blend of how to do the workshops.
But Soraya brought us to Brazil several years ago, and we got to see the Amazon jungle. We spent some time.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So, and Soraya is a great tour guide of the cities in Brazil. It's a beautiful country.
We are working to come to Brazil this August.
Oh.
There was an autism conference that we hope to be involved with, and we will talk with Soraya about doing work with her and for her as well. So once we know more about our schedule, we will let you know about that specific plans.
For sure, for sure.
We want to meet you and your son.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Let's plan that. So, guys, I'm finished here. I'm very glad to hear your story, your enthusiasm, and doing PAX. And I don't know if you can imagine how you guys made a dent in the world, how you guys transformed a lot of lives. So, you guys are like superheroes for me, really, really are like superheroes. So what's the last message you want to say to Brazilian people, to people that will use PAX or use PAX or are using PAX in Brazil?
We hope when people hear about PAX, they understand that, yes, there are pictures involved, but it's not just because there are pictures. It's how to teach children to use the pictures. And those teaching strategies, developed around the science of teaching for a long time. Now, we know we can teach it to professionals, speech pathologists, behavior analysts, but there's equal research that mom and dad can learn to do PAX just as well as any professional. So we know how to teach people. People have to take the time to learn and practice and listen to the child. The child's always right. Essentially, most of the time that they make an error is because we've done something wrong. So we make an adjustment over what we're doing. It's not like, oh, you made a mistake. No, I made a mistake. Let me fix this for you. So that's the attitude that's going to, we think, help the most.
I think, as Andy mentioned, it's not just teachers, speech pathologists, behavior analysts who are part of the formula, but it's also passionate parents like you.
Yes.
And it's parents like you who are my motivation. I meet your children, I help them to communicate, but to me, the biggest benefit is seeing the impact on the family. And in my book, you parents are heroes.
Yeah, you're doing the hard work every single moment of the day. So we're always impressed.
I get to go home at the end of a day and our kids are grown and gone and the grandkids don't live near us. And parenting is 24 hours a day.
I should also clarify, by the way, that Lori and I was very lucky. After Lori and I met several years later, she agreed to marry me. So we are, we do live together. So this is a close relationship.
Oh, you guys so lovely. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm very honored to having you guys here, and I will be very happy if we can meet
Yes.
in person.
Yes, let's do that.
We will do that.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.